Well, howdy do, everyone. I'm Old Man Johnson, and welcome to the show. Sit down in that chair right there, pour yourself a big old glass of sweet tea, and get ready to be entertained and edumacated by my good friends Stephanne and Daryl.
Hey, and welcome to the Wildlife for You podcast and the Old Man Johnson series. I am your host, Stephanie Payne, and I am joined here by my co-host, my best friend, and wildlife biologist extraordinaire, Daryl Radijak. Well, Dee, okay, so it has been a minute since we did our last podcast, so how do you reckon we catch people up?
Well, I think that's pretty simple, Steph. I think what we should do is probably tell everyone kind of what's been going on with our two friends, Old Man Johnson and #Hazel.
You mean how Hazel decided to take off and explore the world? Like, would you believe in the nerve of her, like, heading off to Belgium or somewhere far away and leaving us peasants just kind of stranded here?
Oh, that was Hazel? I thought that was you.
No comments.
Well, don't forget Old Man Johnson. He's been in quite a funk lately, and I swear he seems to be growing more crotchety by the minute. But thankfully, you have a way of bringing him back down to earth. So he's still an ornery rascal, though.
So that was OMJ, was it?
No comment.
Well, okay. Well, I was just glad to see the two of them back at it this past week. But secretly, I don't just think that they enjoy each other's company. I think I know that they enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, me too. And thinking of them two together, I am pretty sure you caught the little spat that they had on their porch.
You mean the bear talk? Like, or in OMJ's case, the bar talk?
Yeah, and I'm not even sure what brought that whole thing up, but given that there's been quite a bit of bar talk in the news lately, I figured it'd make a really good podcast this week.
And you're talking about Grizzly Bars, I imagine.
That I am. And tell you what, why don't I play that snippet from their conversation, and then we're going to dive into explaining to our audience why this is such a pertinent topic right now.
I believe that is a mighty fine idea there, sir. So why don't you go ahead and cue it up?
All right, here we go. This is from Old Man Johnson and #Hazel.
Oh my God. I cannot believe they're thinking about hunting grizzly bears again in Yellowstone. Don't they know that grizzly bears almost went extinct?
Extinct? Are you crazy, woman? There are grizzly bars all over the place. You can barely pick up a newspaper nowadays without reading how a grizzly bar ate someone or killed all their sheep. It's about time the government stepped in and helped those poor folks living in bar country.
Well, there you have it, Steph. That's our topic for today. So we're going to be talking about grizzly bars. So you want to explain why this is such a pertinent topic nowadays?
Well, considering that there's been in the news quite a bit of bar talk lately, I think we ought to talk about what's been going on in everybody's mind, and that would be the big federal announcement regarding the federal listing.
And well, truthfully, Steph, I'm just kind of happy the big news isn't about another attack, because there's been a couple of those. But the discussion we're about to embark on is gonna be involving the status of grizzly bears, and it ought to be good, because I tell you, whenever I hear people talk about this topic, this status of grizzly bears, I usually cringe from all the misinformation that gets thrown about. So where do you want to start with this discussion?
I mean, you cringing at misinformation? Like in
Yes.
another news, water is wet, right? But before we dive in, let me first say that Daryl and I, we had an in-depth discussion last week on trying to discern between how to best confront those kind of emotional-based and science-based reactions to wildlife management issues. So, albeit last week we were chatting about chronic wasting disease, but this topic of grizzly bear management is the prime example of an emotionally charged topic. And wow, like this, it really is kind of the pinnacle for that. And we know that people representing both sides of this discussion are extremely passionate about their beliefs. But we have to approach these topics with logic and critical thinking whenever it's time to make a decision on these matters. So now that I've done my PSA and put my disclaimer out there, now we may proceed.
Well, before we proceed, I'm going to add to that because this is truly an emotional topic. And one of the things that kind of gets to me is whenever you do approach these highly charged emotional topics, people close off the other side. They have their beliefs deep down, and that's great, whatever you truly believe in. But there should never be a time where you stop listening to the other side. Because in order to make an informed conclusion, opinion, whatever you want to make, you got to hear all sides of the story. And so by intentionally blocking out all the information, it's really doing a disservice to whatever topic you're talking about. So I have a feeling we're going to go back and forth on this issue because there's pros and cons, and depending on what side, one person might think it's a pro, the other person might think it's a con. So just keep an open mind as we discuss this topic. So we're going to dive into...
Yeah,
Yep.
I was going to say, let's give them a primer. So let's give them, this is all you. Give everybody a history of grizzlies in the lower 48.
Oh, well, me. Way back when the Earth was first forming. No, I won't go back that far. Usually what we do whenever we're talking about wildlife, a good point to consider is that pre-European situation. Before the early Europeans came here and completely changed the whole makeup of North America. You're looking at grizzly bears, or brown bears is the actual scientific term of them, Ursus arctos, and they're primarily a western species. They're found mostly throughout all the western states. They even kind of ventured all the way into the Great Plains. In fact, Lewis and Clark expedition, a lot of the early encounters of grizzlies were on those Great Plains. And so they ventured fairly close to that Mississippi River. Now, over time, as the early Europeans became more and more prevalent, we started pushing them out of the west. Just so you know, Canada, Alaska, still western-ish portion of the continent, but they still have a lot of grizzly bears up there. Not as much as they used to, but as the early Europeans began growing in population, we don't like competition. So we waged war on grizzlies and kind of reduced their range to what most people nowadays know in the lower 48 as this separate population that consists primarily of Yellowstone National Park and immediate surrounding areas, the greater Yellowstone area, all the way up into Glacier. And that's where they hung on. And so they weren't doing well. 1970s, early 1970s, they estimated that there was probably less than 800 bears left in the lower 48, grizzly bears left in the lower 48. You want to know how bad it got? In Yellowstone, they were thinking there was less than 150. I think the lowest count they estimated was about 136 in Yellowstone. And that's how low it got. And so at that point in time, we decided, you know what? This is an iconic species. All species deserve to be on the landscape where they can survive. And so they decided to do something that was pretty special. Because in 1972, Congress created this thing called the Endangered Species Act. And what that did is it looked at species that were extremely imperiled, and you can classify them. There's a number of different categories, but the two primary categories are there are species that are endangered, which means they are truly on the brink of going extinct. And then the slightly lesser one are species that are classified as threatened, which means they're on the brink of becoming endangered. So it's like one step below. Now, understand, they put bears on this endangered species list in 1975 because those numbers got so low. We are only talking about the population in the lower 48. They were not endangered or threatened in Alaska or Canada or the rest of the world, Russia. Like, there are brown bears all over Asia and Europe. And so we're only talking about this population located in the lower 48 states. And so 1975, they decided to list grizzlies as threatened, which puts all these protections on these animals in hopes of growing their population back. So let me pause there, get a breather. Anything else I need to explain or anything you want to add in there?
No, I don't think so. I will only say, just listening to that slight, monologue there, but it was beautiful because it makes me really proud to be your best friend. I just hope you know that. Like, the fact that you just know all of that stuff is just amazing. So, but no, I think the only thing that I would maybe ask a question about is what is the protective difference on the EPA when it comes to threatened versus endangered?
You said EPA. I'm imagining you mean ESA.
Yes, thank you. So it's a moment. Yeah, I totally got lost, like I said, in your monologue. I'm sorry.
Well, believe it or not, threatened protections and endangered protections are pretty darn similar.
Okay.
If you're listed as either threatened or endangered, all right, let me go back. Most animals, particularly mammals, are managed by the state wildlife agency because they live in a particular state. Now, there are exceptions when it comes to birds because birds migrate long ways, so they fly over, they live in multiple states all at once throughout their lifetime. Those migratory birds are managed by the federal government, but most mammals are managed by state wildlife agencies. So bears, being a mammal, would be managed by the state wildlife agency. So you know as well as I, states manage animals differently. Some states are very protective of species like predators or anything. Other states kind of have a different opinion and don't offer as many protections. So the thing with grizzlies is as soon as they were listed and declared a threatened species, all the individual states lost management control. They were no longer the authority over those animals. They become the authority of the federal government. So they're managed primarily by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like they operate completely on their own without any oversight or anything. They work hand in hand with some of the states, but the final decision on what happens with an animal that's listed under the Endangered Species Act ultimately falls down to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Cool.
So where was I going? What was your original question?
You answered it because it was asking about the difference between being threatened versus being considered.
Okay.
Listed as
Yeah. So they have all these protections. So in other words, once the Fish and Wildlife Service has an animal listed, and I won't go into the whole process. It takes quite a bit of background information. Like you could propose, any group can propose an animal to be listed if they have the data and information showing that this animal is definitely in need. And there's 5 different criteria, and I'm just going to mention a couple of them, but the habitat in which those animals live is extremely imperiled, like disease or anything is impacting those. So any species could be proposed, and then there's a long process in which the Fish and Wildlife Service and statewide, all the interested groups get together and do fact finding to say, is this animal really endangered or really threatened? And then they will make a decision on whether or not it gets listed. Once an animal, if all the data comes back and says, yeah, this animal really needs some help. And we'll use the grizzlies as an example. They were down to less than 800 animals in the whole lower 48, which is primarily Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. And so they warranted the listing. Whenever a species gets listed, one of the things that is supposed to take place, sometimes it takes a while, but the Fish and Wildlife Service has to come up with a recovery plan where they say, all right, here's the current status of this species. This is what's going on. This is how many animals we think. These are the threats that the animals are facing. These are some of the things we can do to improve the status or well-being of this species. And typically, they try to set recovery goals, which more or less means the population is currently at X. If we can get the population to X plus whatever the information they decide, or they use to decide what meets a full recovery, then once they get to that point, then the animal can come off the list. Like if it's endangered, then it could slide down to threatened. If it's threatened, then it could come off the list. And so the grizzly bear had a recovery plan of recovering so many animals in this particular area. And that was 1975.
Okay. So they have been listed since 1975 then? Is that what you're saying there, sir?
That's what I'm saying. Now, did they stay on that list all over the last 51 years? It was a little bit of a yo-yo. And what I mean by that is when they were first listed in 75, very well deserving. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might know this. What was the original recovery goal for number of bears in the greater Yellowstone area? I'm thinking it was.
Gosh, I did a report on this way back in the college days, but I don't think my brain. can
way
go
back
that
when I was
far
in
back.
6th grade.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just essentially just a genetically viable population that they felt could disperse and persist. But
Yeah, and I think they tried setting some numbers. Like, for example, in the Yellowstone, greater Yellowstone area. So just Yellowstone National Park and surrounding areas. I don't know if it was 700 animals or
I
1,000
thought it was
animals.
8. Yeah, I'm
It
wondering
was
like
it's
8,
somewhere.
850.
Now remember, it was down to about 130, 150 bears. So that is like
That's a lot.
increasing the population 5 times over. So that was pretty. That would be pretty good recovery there. So they instituted all these protections. Now, when the Fish and Wildlife Service has control, there's no hunting season. You can't kill an animal, or you can't even like impact its habitat, negatively impact its habitat. And so there's really, really strong restrictions. I should have mentioned that is that they come at you with a hammer that makes sure that you're not, because we're talking about the viability or the existence of to cause an animal to go extinct. That's playing God there, and it's
Well, and let's be clear. Let's just, on the other side of that hypothetical conversation about God, if they did go extinct locally. So, because like you just mentioned, we do have other subspecies of brown bear across the world. Let's just play that out for a brief and shining moment. If they had gone extinct locally and we then tried to bring in a different subspecies of bear, we would have paid hell for that as well. So
that's a whole nother podcast. We
that
probably
is a
did
whole
2 of
other
those
podcast.
podcasts.
But I'm just saying that's what happens when we make animals go extinct. We can't even replace them with the next best. So
Yeah, even though it's super, super close. So
yeah.
anyway, going back to the whole listing of grizzlies. So 1975, very well-deserved placing on the endangered. Now, again, lower 48, Canada, Alaska, they're doing great. But we're trying to maintain a population in that lower 48, particularly that greater Yellowstone Glacier, Bitterroot, the rugged northern Rockies area. Now, they responded well. So from 1975 all the way up to the early 2000s, their population was growing. And they were really getting close to, if not exceeding, these recovery goals because they put a number of animals or grizzlies they want on the landscape, and then they're really close to it. Now, people will argue because how do you come up with a number? How many animals are in the population?
You just have to make an estimate, right?
Yes. Nobody knows exactly. You can, yeah. And so people would argue, oh, that's an overestimate. Oh, that's an underestimate. Oh. So they'll go back and forth, back and forth. But the good thing is they were doing much better. Mm-hmm. So 2007, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, we met the recovery goals. We're going to recommend that they get taken off the list. Can I bring up a pet peeve of mine?
I would never dream of stopping you.
Well, because when an animal is taken off the list, meaning they are no longer threatened or endangered, that is a reason to celebrate and cheer. And so many people like fight for animals to be, it's like they want them to be critically endangered. And it's like, I don't get it.
I don't think that they want them to be
I know that,
they
but
just want the protections to persist.
Right. I get that, but it's like, man, if an animal is getting close to whether or not it should be on the list, it still should be something that's comforting, at least.
Agreed.
So,
success stories, small victories.
Yes. So 2007, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, you know what? We're going to take them off the list. And they recommended that they were delisted. And they were for a short period of time because there's obviously different lawsuits and things that happen. And one of the things they realized, and this is again early 2000s, have you heard of white bark pine?
I know that is a food source.
Yes, they produce a nut, just like many of the pine trees. And is a huge, huge food source for grizzlies in that northern Rocky Mountain area. And we have this pine beetle that comes in and it devastates some of these pine forests. So one of the biggest food sources for grizzlies was getting wiped out pretty much the same time that the bears were getting delisted. And so people were saying, well, this isn't good. They're gonna struggle again.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years later, 2009, they're put back on the list because that's something you got to make sure if you take them off that they're going to do okay after you take them off.
Yeah.
So 2009, they went back on the list, and things were chugging along. Grizzly populations continue to grow, and you know as well as I, like you're having there's two big populations. There's that glacier population, and then that greater Yellowstone population. And if you can link them up where they actually can move back and forth as far as from genetic viability, and it's a good thing to connect those two distinct populations. And so they're growing. They're really close to getting to that point. So in 2017, guess what? They were delisted again. And one of the things that happens when an animal is delisted to go from threatened to be completely taken off the list, the state wildlife agencies assume control of their management again. And I remember this distinctly. I was living in New Mexico and obviously big bear aficionado. I remember when all this happened. And literally the next day, it might not have been the next day, but within weeks, two of the states, and I think it was Idaho and Wyoming, announced plans to start hunting the grizzlies again. Now, albeit I am a state wildlife guy, born and bred and raised in career for a long time, I understand hunting. And the way they had it set up, it was not going to be a detriment to the population because they're only going to allow one or two tags or just a tiny, tiny amount. But man, talk about bad messaging, bad timing, bad. You don't do that.
Yeah.
And so, as soon as that was announced, it was like it set off these emotionally charged people that said, "No, you cannot do this." And so, sure enough, 2018, they're relisted. And that's where we've been ever since, until about a week and a half ago.
So, but
Okay.
I think you kind of segued to a good point, right? Like, as soon as things happen related to an extraordinarily iconic species that honestly has a lot of symbolism to that old, the wild of the west part of the continent here, it's newsworthy. It's talked about. It is instantaneously a topic that's going to be in front of everybody because that's just what bears do.
You know what? I've been talking way too much. I'm going to ask you a few things because you say grizzlies can steal the national media spotlight in the blink of an eye. One of the ways they do that is grizzly bears are big. I don't want to say scary. They're not scary. They're big animals that can kill you dead. So. Yes. So there's a couple instances, and you know these a whole lot better, but tell the audience some of the more famous bear attacks, to put it lightly. Yes.
Infamous ones? I mean, lately is a subjective term because, we had a fatality just earlier this year in the Glacier National Park area. And like you kind of mentioned, right, you've got these couple areas that are huge recreational draws, Glacier and Yellowstone. And then, so that's bringing in people, and that's also where these populations of brown bears have really not only persisted, but that's the area then obviously since where they persisted where they're going to grow to a pretty good population. So I think one of probably the most famous ones happened, I guess it's been about 2 decades now when the Matayoshi and Wallace Yellowstone attacks actually occurred.
Well, real quick, Night of the Grizzlies, that was way before. Wasn't that in the 60s?
Correct. That was in the 70s, I believe. And that one, just to get everybody kind of clued in, it was very, very odd. But in Glacier, they actually had back-to-back fatalities with grizzlies, literally happening in the same night. 2 different areas, 2 different completely sets of people, 2 different bears, but there was 2 bear fatalities that evening. So yeah, which is very rare. It's rare for one to happen, but it's extremely rare for 2 to happen in the same day. But so the Matayoshi one, and that one was kind of public. It was the Matayoshi Wallace. So that one was kind of nifty because you have a mama bear with cubs who
Where was this?
That's when it's in Yellowstone. And, it started off with a picture. So you've got a couple that are the Matayoshi couple is out in there. They're taking pictures of the local flora and fauna, and they see a mama with cubs out in a field, and they are taking pictures. And potentially, I don't like to victim blame, but they're potentially too close when they notice that this is happening. And the mama bear charges and does end up killing Mr. Matayoshi. And then a lot of people, because again, these can go very public in just an instantaneous heartbeat. A lot of people go to the defense of the bear. You see this a lot of times where, a lot of times you'll get the arguments that a bear is just being a bear, but in this case, you've got a mom with cubs. So everybody is saying this is just a mama bear doing what a mama bear does. Everybody knows you don't mess with the mama bear because, things are going to happen. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it wasn't a prolonged attack. She was just delivering.
Yeah, she chased him down. And the wife got away, and she attacked and killed him. It wasn't a prolonged thing. It was just it was a bite. By all intents and purposes appeared to be a normal defensive reaction for a mama grizzly. Little extreme, obviously. I don't want to downplay that. But the ironic thing is, so the whole world comes to bat for the mama bear and says that she was just doing what mama bears do. And then ironically, not too long thereafter, there's another fatality that happens in Yellowstone. And there's evidence of multiple bears in the area when they find the deceased individual who had actually, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but had actually been fed upon. And so when they're bringing in the team to do all of the forensics investigation, they're obviously going around and they're collecting all of the bear scat in the local area because they need to run some genetics because it's a pretty bear populous area. And the one thing we don't want to do, none of us want to do, is accuse the wrong bear. Because it's really difficult on bears. Even if you grab one and you put it in captivity for a while to pull the DNA on it to wait for it to come back, that is an extraordinarily stressful thing on the bear. Long story short, the culprit bear that at bare minimum fed on the guy was the same mama bear and her one of their two cubs.
So they never put her down after that first incident.
They didn't put her down after the first incident because the public came out in outcry and said she's just being a mama bear, but then she's implicated. Now, here's where it all goes kind of a little bit sideways. There are guesstimations that she also was the one who then had a predatory attack and killed this other individual, but it's not like any of us were sitting there and taking notes, so we really just are making an assumption. There is a chance that she came upon the deceased person and fed upon them post-mortem, but yeah. So, and that's just one of the cases, right? Like I could probably spit out 5 in the last 5 to 10 years. It's not frequent, but when they happen, they're everywhere. Everybody knows about it.
So I'm just thinking here, it's so interesting because you're telling about these horrific events that sometimes takes place between bears and humans, and oftentimes human loses in that situation. Yet you have this public that is so in love with bears that they will defend the bears at all costs.
Yes.
And yeah, so that I think that's a great example of demonstrating the emotional investment that people have in grizzlies, because no matter what, they're going to be defending them.
I mean, you and I, bears are like you say it all the time. They're charismatic and they're iconic. I mean, how many bears end up with their own paparazzi and Facebook pages, and if we extended that out to black bears, they're named individuals. You know what I mean? They are literally named individuals with a fan club.
Well, it just dawned on me, like the Queen of the Tetons, Bear 399. She started her career, she attacked someone, and then and she's known as being like the most gracious, wonderful spokesperson bear out there. So anyway, it makes it challenging as a wildlife manager, which I consider myself being one of those, how to manage these animals. And again, whenever I talk about bears or any other wildlife species that I deal with, I have this, maybe it's a defense mechanism, but I have a way of thinking about them as a population instead of the individual. Because if you get stuck thinking of the individual, it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult. So my number one priority is thinking of them as a whole, as a population. And so it leads to difficult situations because outside of the human fatality, there is a ton of other human bear conflict situations. So you have bears, grizzlies and blacks both. You have them getting into, they get into human country. Now, lots of people talk about bear country, and you got to know better when you're in bear country. But a lot of times, bears come into human country. So I would say any place that's developed where you have lots of houses, obviously you're going to have lots of people, lots of trash, and bears come in and they cause conflict. Whether or not it's damage to vehicles, they break into vehicles, they break into barns. Sometimes they break into houses. And there's lots of situations where, as a wildlife management agency, they have to deal with those situations. And here's the thing. It's not always, they knocked over my garbage can. Occasionally, there's some significant losses to people and their livelihood. The folks that live in bear country, that whether or not they're farmers, ranchers, doing whatever. A lot of people live and make their living out in the country. And if bears come in and mess with that, you have someone that raises bees and has beehives to raise money for honey, and a bear comes in and destroys that, that is a serious hardship for those individuals. Same thing with ranchers. Same thing with even folks that might not be making money, but maybe having chickens or other livestock for food for their own family. It's like these bears could have serious impacts on humans. And so it definitely sets up a situation where managing these animals, you have to make some hard decisions. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna bring up again that bears have a way of polarizing people very, very effectively, because when stuff like that happens, everybody who's not those farmers, not those rural people living in whether it's to augment their own, family's nutritional needs or their money, the people who are not in those situations turn into raging instant critics. Well, they need to move. Well, there's other things they could do. Well, they need to do this and they need to do that and they need to pony up this money to get this brand spanking new whatever. You know what I mean? It definitely polarizes people. But so not only the cost to the individual, but that costs agencies. So what does that look like?
Oh, it's tremendous cost. But before I mention any of those costs, that's the whole polarization of everything. And I'm probably going to just repeat everything you just said. But most of the people come at it knowing only one side of the story. If you're that wildlife photographer or just someone that vacations in Yellowstone or Glacier, you want to see those bears, get your pictures, have a cool vacation, and then you go back home and you don't deal with them. You have a very positive outlook of bears. But then, so you only have one side of the story. The other side are the people that live with the bears, and they see these bears coming in, causing damage. Just they have to deal with living with those bears. So they have that side of the story. They don't get as excited seeing a bear because they see it all the time. So that's why I think we're well suited to talk about this, because we do both. I love bears. I go on vacation to Yellowstone. I also do management. And so understanding two sides of the story, this is why it's so important not to block out that other side. You got to take in all the information you can to really think hard and make the best decisions possible. But you mentioned about the cost of this management. It is, do you have any idea how much, okay, per year, like grizzly bears are managed currently by the Fish and Wildlife Service because they're on the endangered species list. How much do you think that one agency spends on managing grizzlies per year?
Okay, do you want me to play dumb, or do you want me to play like I actually maybe looked into this?
You probably know it. So tell me roughly how much they spend.
About $3.5 million a year, right?
Yes. And wow, that's a lot of money. $3.5 million a year from one agency on one species.
Yeah.
That is nothing, because remember, it's not just the Fish and Wildlife Service dealing with this. You have all those individual state wildlife agencies dealing with it. So, for example, grizzly bears were listed on endangered species as an endangered species in 1975. Since that listing, Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, State Wildlife Agency in Wyoming, has spent over $70 million managing grizzlies.
Let me get my calculator out. Go ahead.
Montana, I think I was looking it up, is like $45 million just since like 1990. And so there is a ton, like millions of dollars, like millions and millions, maybe close to $10 million spent each year just for managing a handful of bears. And when I say a handful of bears, it's 1,000 bears. It's a significant number, but it's not like the 50 million white-tailed deer we have out there.
Truth.
So it's a small number of animals that is really costing a ton of money to manage these animals.
Yeah, so we're looking at $6.5 million just for the three that we cited per year. So if we take that and we multiply that by the 51 years that we're talking about, that is a chunk of change.
It's a chunk of change.
Yeah, and we're talking like $300 million or something.
Now, I'll play the devil's advocate. as a devil's advocate, because I hear this thrown out all the time. Well, grizzlies bring in all this money because people go to Yellowstone to look at grizzlies or go to Glacier. That is true. And I looked up to see roughly how much money is brought in to the economy for people going to Yellowstone for that reason, to look at wildlife. And the one survey I looked at, I think it was USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. They did that. They analyzed that, and it came out to be about $35 million per year, where Yellowstone's bringing people in for wildlife. Now, keep in mind, that's all wildlife. Here's the big kicker. That is just bringing the money into the economy. That's not bringing money in for grizzlies. That's
Correct.
bringing money into the restaurants, to the shopping stores, to the gas stations. That's a boost in the local economy. And so that is not paying for grizzly bear management. We did a podcast where who funds most of the wildlife management. And some people will argue it.
We did.
But it's still, hunters and fishermen are still the lion's share of who's paying for all this stuff. I will say, in that analysis I looked at, with 35 million coming in each year, grizzlies accounted for about 7 million of that. You know which species would have brought in the most?
Ooh. Well, since I can't say cougars because I know that's not true, I'll go with the wolf packs.
Yeah, they would account for most of the people wanting to go to Yellowstone to see something. So anyway, it's the bottom line is it's expensive to manage these animals, and people are passionate about how we manage. You could argue different ways in which we manage, the different values of all this, but it's definitely something that usually raises quite the conversation around the coffee table whenever you bring up grizzly management. So did you hear
the paparazzi for like you mentioned earlier, $3.99? Do you think that when we have bears like that, or there was a couple other ones I think in the Tetons? No, it was Tahoe area, where some of the bears were also equally named. But do you think that those types of air quotes relationships with bears, where they have become kind of the, either the iconic bear like in $3.99, or those, for lack of a better term, community pet bears. I hate to say that because I don't want people to think that I condone but that exacerbates that cost, right? Because
oh my gosh, yeah. Do you remember when you and I took the students to Greater Yellowstone area? I think it was like 2021 or so.
Yeah, I'm getting old, but I haven't forgot that one yet.
You are getting old.
Thank you.
Anyway, we were talking with someone who worked closely with bears up there in that the Teton area, and very specifically about bear 399. And they ran some numbers, and their best estimate was just one bear alone was costing the agency close to $1 million a year. Because just think of all the calls they get in, all the traffic jams that they've got to settle, and all the personnel they bring in. Now, we could argue back and forth. Well, not you and I, but folks would argue with us about 399 and how great of a bear she was. But if we were to anthropomorphize all bears like that, we couldn't afford it. It's like I said, you got to think, as a wildlife manager, you got to think of the populations, because thinking of the individual animals, although I understand the intrinsic value of those individual animals, we just can't manage at that level.
Yeah.
Can't afford to.
No,
No.
we can't. So what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, so did you hear the announcement recently, like about a week or so ago, that I sent to you?
Yes. Yes. So just for clarity, if you hadn't sent it to me, I don't know that I would have seen it yet because I am a little slow on the news sometimes. But yes, so there was an announcement pretty recently that they're looking at putting the management back into the state's hands for brown bears. So what does that
Yeah,
talk to us? What does that mean? Because I know what I originally read that I was not a happy girl.
I know, and I had to talk you down off the
Yeah,
ledge.
yeah, you had to explain to me really what that meant, and this is vital. Break it down.
Again, there's that point of view and that point of view, and they fight for their sides, and unfortunately, they throw a lot of misinformation back at each other. So, one of the things, there's a big announcement about a week ago with a number of top people with Fish and Wildlife Service, states of Wyoming, Montana, and they made this announcement about a change in the status of grizzly bears. So immediately, people were saying, oh, they're going to start hunting them again. That was one side. The other side was saying, well, it's about time we need to do something to manage it. So it's somewhere in the middle. You know, whenever you hear a story, you hear one side, you hear the other side, and then you hear that somewhere in the middle where you get the truth. So what it was, they're not proposing to take grizzly bears off the threatened and endangered, the T&E list. So they're still going to be listed as threatened species. But they're kind of changing the handling of that species. Now remember, when they were first listed in 1975, there's very distinct populations, and I sent you a map to your phone today. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but
Going now.
But there's very distinct populations. So you have that greater Yellowstone population. You have a population of grizzlies in Glacier. There's a couple in Bitterroot. There's the Selkirk Mountains. There's that Cascade Range. There's these little pockets all over. Mm-hmm. They're spread they're pretty far apart. And then everything surrounding those areas, like extending all the way into the Great Plains in Montana, all the way almost to the Pacific coast in Washington, there's all that land where these grizzlies currently are protected because they're on the threatened and endangered species list. So they have those federal protections. The problem is, as it stands right now, the way things operate, anything that happens with those bears, it's the Fish and Wildlife Service they've got to be the one in control to make the decision and figure out what's going to happen. You can imagine with bears scattered all over there's going to be lots of instances of conflict that will have to be dealt with relatively quickly. And so what they're suggesting is to give the states the ability to handle those conflicts as they need to handle them without having that final oversight from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, there's no hunting seasons proposed. I see that look, and I know something's coming. But immediately people are saying, oh, they're going to start hunting them. You can't do that. They're still a threatened species, so you can't propose a hunting season. But it does allow the states to better manage these conflict situations. Now, shoot me with what you got.
Okay, so all I would ask for, I will be perfectly fine, I believe, with this if they were to create an overarching matrix, like a standard, like to think of it as a flow chart, if this, then this, to lead these agencies to all very similar management techniques. And I say that only because I have dealt with quite a few states as well when it comes to conflict bears or conflict animals. And I'm telling you, there are some states that are like, that bear looked at you wrong, we'll shoot it. That's an embellishment, folks, but
I was going to say, I hate to agree with you, but it's the whole good cop, bad cop. Because I've dealt with people throughout my career that just did not want to deal with those animals. And I remember one instance where someone who had management authority didn't want bears getting into their area, and
they were heavy-handed.
Well, and they talked about those bears were nuisance bears, and I said, how do you define a nuisance bear? And they said, if I see it, it's a nuisance. And
So,
that's the bad cop. And you gotta hope there's bad cops throughout any agency, any organization, anything. The bad actors, I shouldn't say bad cops, the bad actors. Hopefully the good actors will overcome any of those bad actors. But I understand your concern.
yes. I mean, so when if you look at like an incident response system for, for example, and I'm just going to throw this out there, but if you look at what we would teach, we actually taught that you had a specific matrix to help classify the level of threat that bear introduces. And they could so easily make something, and that's not asking too much, right? Like just make a guideline so that there's a standard that everybody has to comply with. If they want to be less harsh than that, cool, but at least set that baseline so we're not going in there just lighting up every bear that we see. That's all I think. I think a lot of people would just be content if we had that middle ground.
I think that's a great thought. And I know a couple states that have a matrix like that. The one problem I see is you can't get people in the same family to agree on stuff. So you're not going to get states to agree on stuff because
that's the joy of it still being federally listed, though.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. It's just very difficult because states want to maintain their autonomy, and it's understandable. If you're a state, you want to be able to dictate how you manage those animals, and so it's a wonderful ask. I don't know if it's going to go that way. We could be surprised, and it does end up that way. But anyway, none of this is finalized, by the way. This was just recommended. I believe there's a comment period out there right now.
There is a comment period on here, and one of the links that you sent me, I will be commenting, and I will be adding my comment about it.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you. And everyone is strongly encouraged to comment on that. We will never tell you on this podcast how you should think. We will tell you as many of the facts as we know them so you can make a logical decision on how you should think. But that's one of the things I mentioned. We don't like blocking the other side off because oftentimes when you sit down and think about it and you hear the other side, you're like, I never thought of that. Well, that's because you were never open to that idea before. So hopefully we expanded your understanding of some things. But I love grizzly bears. I hope the best for them. I don't know where this is going to go, but as long as they're on the landscape, for me, my kids, your kids, everyone's kids out there to see and enjoy them, I'll be happy. So
Agreed. How long have we been talking, sir?
Too long.
Too long?
No, it's not too long. 52 minutes, not too bad.
Okay, it's not bad.
That's not bad. So I'm going to let you wrap it up.
All right, I can do that. So once again, folks, we absolutely love talking to you about wildlife. Obviously, we definitely love talking about wildlife, and we do love trying to clear up some of that misinformation that you hear out there. But we also do love listening to you. So if you have any topics that you'd like for us to explore, please reach out to us. You can always reach us through the Wildlife for You Facebook Messenger, or you can email us at wfyquestions@gmail.com.
Yes, ma'am. And we really would love to hear from you guys. So whatever topic ideas you may have, any compliments, and heck, you can even throw a few criticisms if you really don't like them bears out there. But bars, I should have said. Any criticisms, again, send directly to Stephanie at stephanie.email.com. But we do thank you for listening, folks. And remember, when it comes to wildlife, your knowledge often means their existence. Thank you and be well.